Welcome to our YouTube channel, where learning English becomes simple, fun, and exciting. Whether you're a beginner or improving your skills, I'll guide you step by step to speak English confidently and fluently. Let's start this amazing journey together. In the heart of the verdant vale, where the river sang softly over smooth stones, and the trees whispered secrets to the wind, lived an old man named Eldrin. His home was a modest cottage, its thatched roof sagging under the weight of time, its walls cloaked in ivy. Eldrin was no ordinary elder. His eyes, sharp as polished obsidian, held the weight of countless seasons, and his voice carried a cadence that seemed to echo the rhythm of the earth itself. The villagers called in the Sage of the Vale, though he dismissed the title with a wry smile, saying, "I'm just a man who's lived long enough to listen." Eldrin's days began before dawn. He rose with the first blush of light, tending to his garden of herbs and wildflowers, each plant chosen not for beauty, but for purpose. Some to heal, others to soothe, a few to awaken the mind. His hands, gnarled as the roots of the ancient oak that stood sentinel by his door, moved with a precision that belied his age. By mid-morning, he would sit on a weathered bench outside his cottage, carving small wooden figures, foxes, owls, or spiraling knots that seemed to hum with hidden meaning. The villagers often found him there, and they came not just for his remedies, but for his words, which had a way of untangling the knots in their hearts. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves fell like embers from the trees, a young woman named Lyra approached the cottage. Her steps were hesitant, her eyes shadowed with worry. She was no stranger to Eldrin. As a child, she had sat at his feet, listening to tales of star-born heroes and rivers that carved the world. But today, she carried a burden heavier than childhood curiosity. "Eldrin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need your help. The village is fracturing. A council argues over the drought. The crops are failing, and tempers flare like dry tinder. My brother, Torin, speaks of leaving, seeking a new home beyond the veil. Others agree with him, but I fear what we'll lose if we abandon this place." Eldrin set down the half-carved figure of a stag, its antlers just beginning to take shape. He studied Lyra, his gaze steady but kind. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the bench beside him. "Tell me, what does your heart say?" Lyra hesitated, then sat, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't know. I love the Vale, its songs, its stories, the way the hills seem to hold us. But the river shrinks each year, and the fields yield less. Torin says we're fools to stay, clinging to a dying land. He's not wrong, but leaving feels like betraying something sacred." Eldrin nodded, his fingers tracing the grain of the wooden stag. "The land is not dying, Lyra. It's changing, as all things do. The question is whether you change with it or fight against the current. Tell me about Torin." Why is he so eager to leave? Lyra sighed. He's always been restless. He dreams of cities beyond the mountains, of wealth and new beginnings. He says the veil is too small for his ambitions, but I think he's running from something. Maybe himself. Eldrin leaned back, his eyes drifting to the oak, its branches swaying gently. The veil has held people for generations, Lyra. It's not just earth and water. It's memory. But memory can be a heavy thing. Sometimes people leave, not because the land fails them, but because they fear they failed it. Lyra frowned, her brow furrowing. You think Torin feels he's failed? I think, Eldrin said, that every heart carries its own questions. Torin's may be louder than most, but let's not speak of him alone. The village, what do they fear most? They fear hunger, Lyra said. They fear another season of empty baskets. They fear the unknown beyond the veil. But also the known, the slow decline of what we have. Eldrin rose, his movements slow but deliberate, and beckoned Lyra to follow him into the cottage. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of roots and leaves, scrolls tied with twine, and small carvings that seemed to watch from their perches. He pulled a stool to a low table and gestured for Lyra to sit. Fear, he said, is a teacher, but a harsh one. It shows us what we value, but it can blind us to what's possible. The veil has faced droughts before, Lyra. Long before you were born, when I was younger than you, the river ran so thin we thought it would vanish. The village was smaller then, but the fear was the same. Do you know what saved us? Lyra shook her head, leaning forward. We listened, Eldrin said. Not just to each other, but to the land. The river didn't vanish. It changed its course. We found new springs, deeper wells. The crops failed, so we learned to plant what thrives in lean years. Millet instead of wheat, roots instead of vines. The veil is not your enemy. It's your partner. But it demands patience. Lyra's eyes brightened, though doubt lingered. But how do we convince the others? Torin's voice is loud, and fear makes people listen to the loudest. Eldrin smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Then we give them something louder, not in volume, but in truth. Gather the village tonight, by the oak. Tell them Eldrin has a story to share. Stories have a way of quieting fear. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the sky burned orange, the villagers gathered around the great oak. They came with folded arms and furrowed brows, their whispers sharp with worry. Torin stood at the edge, his jaw set, his eyes darting, as if already half gone from the veil. Lyra stood beside Eldrin, her hands steady now, though her heart raced. Eldrin stepped forward, his staff tapping the earth. The crowd hushed, drawn by the quiet authority of his presence. You've come, he said, his voice carrying like a breeze over water. Because the veil tests you. You fear for your homes, your children, your future. I've seen this fear before, and I'll tell you a story of another time. when the veil seemed lost, but found its way. He began to speak, his words weaving a tale of a winter long past, when frost claimed the fields and the river froze. The villagers then, like now, had quarreled. Some wanted to flee, others to stay, others to burn the forests for warmth. But one woman, a weaver named Saria, had walked the vale alone, listening to its whispers. She found a hidden spring, its waters warm even in the cold, and taught the village to dig, to plant, to wait. Saria didn't save the vale, Eldrin said. She reminded it how to save itself. And the vale remembers those who listen. The villagers leaned closer, their faces softening. Eldrin's story wasn't just words. It was a mirror, reflecting their own struggles. He spoke of the oak, how its roots stretched deeper than any drought could reach, how it stood not because it fought the wind, but because it bent with it. He spoke of the river, which seemed to shrink but always found a new path. The vale is not a place, he said. It's a promise. It gives what you give it: patience, courage, trust. Torin stepped forward, his voice sharp. Stories are fine, old man, but they don't fill bellies. The river's nearly dry. The fields are dust. What's your answer? More waiting? Eldrin met Torin's gaze, unyielding but not unkind. You're right, Torin. Stories don't fill bellies, but they fill hearts, and hearts move hands. The river's path has shifted west. Lyra and I walked it this afternoon. There's water there, enough to carry us through. The fields need new seeds, ones that drink less. I have them in my cottage, gathered over years. The veil hasn't failed you. It's asking you to see it anew. Torin's shoulders stiffened, but he said nothing, his eyes flickering with doubt. The villagers murmured, some nodding, others whispering to their neighbors. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. Eldrin's right. I've seen the new springs. We can dig channels, plant smarter. Leaving might be easier, but staying is braver. Who's with me? A few hands rose, then more. The murmurs grew into a chorus of agreement, though not without hesitation. Torin stood silent, his face unreadable, but he didn't leave. Eldrin watched him, knowing the young man's heart was a storm, not yet calmed. Over the next weeks, the village changed. Guided by Eldrin's knowledge and Lyra's fire, they dug channels to the new springs, redirecting water to the fields. They planted hardy seeds from Eldrin's stores. And though the harvest would be lean, it would come. Torin worked alongside them, quieter now, his hands learning the rhythm of the land. One evening, as the sun set, he approached Eldrin's cottage, alone. Old man, he said, his voice softer than before. I thought you were clinging to the past, but you saw what I couldn't. How did you know? Eldrin chuckled, carving a new figure, a hawk, its wings half-formed. I didn't know, Torin. I listened. The veil speaks, but only to those who stay long enough to hear. You're learning that now. Torin nodded, his eyes on the hawk. I thought leaving was strength. Maybe staying is too. It's not about staying or leaving, Eldrin said. It's about choosing with your eyes open. The veil will always be here, Torin. But it's you who decides what it means. Years passed, and the veil thrived again. Its fields green, its river steady. Eldrin grew frailer, his steps slower, but his eyes never lost their spark. Lyra became the village's heart, her courage a beacon. Torin stayed, his restlessness tempered by purpose, his hands now as skilled as Eldrin's in tending the land. When Eldrin finally passed, the village gathered under the oak, now taller, its roots deeper. They buried him beneath it, as he'd asked, and carved his name into the bark. No one called him the sage anymore. He was simply Eldrin, the man who listened. And the veil, as always, whispered on.